and thanks for joining Sapelo Nerds, a coastal science podcast. I'm your host, Corinne.
And I'm your host, Brittany. And we work at the National Estuarine Research Reserve, or NERR, on Sapelo Island, a Georgia barrier island.
Today we're exploring a fascinating topic, improving resilience at Department of Defense, or DoD, sites along coastal Georgia. They may seem like an unlikely site for something like habitat conservation for resilience, but several groups are trying to change that.
That's right, Corinne. DoD sites are huge landowners in the coastal Georgia area. So getting their buy-in for conservation strategies, especially for resilience efforts, is very important. The DoD has already been a partner for a lot of conservation programs and organizations. We'll have a link to the story map in our show notes that explains how 3 sites particularly, including our local Fort Stewart, have worked to help 2 imperiled bird species on our coast.
And Department of Defense, or DoD-owned properties, have done a great job preserving habitats and the wildlife that relies on them. Some resilience strategies have included installation of green infrastructure for their more developed areas, or preservation of large areas for critical species. And DoD sites along coastal Georgia are not only crucial for national security, but are also vulnerable to environmental challenges, like rising sea levels, increased storm intensity, and coastal erosion, just like all of our coastal Georgia communities.
Yeah, exactly. Coastal Georgia is home to several key DoD installations. Some to mention are Fort Stewart, Hunter Army Airfield, and the Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base. And like you said, these installations are not only vital for military operations, but they are also situated in ecologically rich and sensitive areas. That makes resilience planning, which is adapting to environmental challenges like sea level rise and hurricanes and habitat loss, a top priority. These efforts also align with the DoD's broader commitment to sustainability and climate adaptation. The 2021 DoD Climate Adaptation Plan emphasizes the need to integrate natural infrastructure and conservation into resilience planning. Coastal Georgia's installation are leading the way in showing how this can be done effectively.
It's really inspiring to see these sites not only focusing on mission readiness, but also contributing to the health of our coastal ecosystems. These projects not only help manage stormwater, but also enhance the biodiversity of an area. They serve as crucial habitats for many species of birds, fish, and other wildlife. A study published in the journal Ecological Engineering highlighted that wetland restoration can significantly increase biodiversity and improve ecosystem services. Wetlands act as natural buffers, absorbing storm surges and reducing the impact of flooding to local communities.
Yeah, and when you say that, that really makes me think of Kings Bay Naval Base, which is located in the St. Mary's River Basin. This base is critical for the Navy's Atlantic submarine fleet and faces threats like coastal flooding and storm surges. To address these challenges, Kings Bay has developed a resilience strategy that includes protecting nearby wetlands and marshes.
By preserving and restoring these ecosystems, Kings Bay not only protects its infrastructure, but also contributes to regional biodiversity. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, coastal wetlands can reduce flood damage by up to 30% during major storms.
And another great example is Fort Stewart, which is home to one of the largest remaining longleaf pine ecosystems in the southeast. Longleaf pine habitats are incredibly biodiverse and provide critical habitat for species like the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. Fort Stewart's resilience planning includes managing these forests to reduce wildfire risks while also maintaining their ecological value, benefiting both the community and those animals that live in that area.
And that's a win-win for the military and the environment, too. By conducting controlled burns and managing invasive species, Fort Stewart not only protects its training grounds, but also helps sustain a vital ecosystem. A study in the journal Forest Ecology and Management found that proactive forest management can significantly improve resilience to climate change and extreme weather.
These examples demonstrate the tangible benefits of conservation and resilience planning in partnership with DoD sites. Not only do these projects help mitigate environmental risks, but they also create a more resilient and sustainable environment for both military operations and the surrounding community.
And the benefits extend beyond just environmental. land conservation strategies have significant impacts to local economies and provide communities that extend well past the bases with effective retention of water.
Plus, these projects can have positive impact on the health and well-being of military personnel stationed at these sites. Access to green spaces and preservation areas, as we've talked about in the past, is shown to reduce stress and improve overall quality of life.
By conserving land, practicing effective resilient strategies like harnessing natural processes, and utilizing best management practices for coastal resilience, these sites not only address immediate environmental challenges, but also pave the way for a more sustainable future.
And that's a great point that brings us to our guest for today. Michelle Covey is the DoD liaison with the University of Georgia's Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. Thanks for coming on today, Michelle. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a Coastal Resilience DoD liaison?
Thanks so much, Brittany and Corinne, for having me on the podcast. I'm a fan of your work and looking forward to your military-themed jokes. So that's right. I am the Coastal Resilience DoD liaison for the Sea Grant program, and I work regionally in the Southeast and nationally to connect with communities that support military and build resilience to climate change, extreme weather, and coastal erosion. Communities on the coast support military in a whole lot of different ways. Most personnel that work on installations and ranges live in the community. For example, Fort Stewart, which is the largest installation east of the Mississippi River, employs over 20,000 people. And if you count all the families and retired folks in the area around Hinesville and adjacent counties, that's more than 50,000 people. Most of the active duty military live on the installation, but the majority of the other folks, including many of the families and civilian workers, live in the community. Plus, these installations depend upon the same ecosystem services all communities do, like water resources. My job is to connect these installations and communities to NOAA and Sea Grant resources, including my Sea Grant colleagues living in or serving these areas. We want to work with the installation on projects that build coastal resilience and protect and restore natural and working lands that are most compatible with the installation.
Sounds like a pretty big task to work with so many people, but we definitely love hearing about programs that build bridges between resources and communities. And speaking of bridges, getting around and dealing with water is a big deal for coastal Georgia. In particular, we're all pretty concerned about flooding, as that becomes a bigger issue with rising sea levels and changing precipitation patterns. The DoD sites across coastal Georgia are focused on flood mitigation too. Can you talk a little bit about the need for sustainable flood mitigation solutions on the bases and why this is a win-win for both the installations and our neighboring communities in coastal Georgia?
As we saw in Tropical Storm Debby, flooding affects both communities and installations, and therefore military missions, such as training. Flooding does not stop at fences, and the military services like the Army have recognized the importance of planning for increasing storms and other climate impacts, both on the installation and with the community. The Department of Defense supports community planning processes through the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation that help the communities work with installations to identify priority projects in the community that can support the military mission. These studies help create a bridge that integrates both communities and military needs. This plan also opens up the opportunity for the community to apply for funding from DoD for building projects like new drainage areas or a living shoreline that would build resilience to flooding or coastal erosion.
So the DoD installations are really working to help the communities they are a part of, studying the impacts on their specific locations and providing funding for local projects. On a slightly larger scale, you recently did a webinar discussing your work with the Southeast Regional Partnership for Planning and Sustainability, or SRPS, and their Coastal Resilience and Regional Adaptation Working Group. It's a mouthful. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why it's important?
SRPAS is a voluntary collaboration among DoD, state leaders from natural resources, working lands, and environmental protection agencies in the Southeast, and regional leaders from their federal agency counterparts. I lead the work group for one of the 5 focus areas, coastal resilience and regional adaptation. SURPASS is a large landscape program that's funded through the DoD Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration, or REPI program. REPI works in communities by establishing cost-share agreements between military service and governments or NGOs that work to avoid land use conflicts, address environmental restrictions of some kind, and increase resilience to climate change. Many people do not know that DoD manages about 27 million acres of land nationwide. Much of that is natural lands that are under the same laws as other public lands. And so they have to do things like preserve at-risk species and cultural resources. So DoD does a lot of natural resource management. Just over 20 years ago, the idea of DoD working with others to manage the land outside the fences to benefit their goals started the REPI program. And since it is DoD, they are interested in large landscape conservation and big impacts. So one of the ideas that emerged from SURPASS recently was the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative, which was also supported by Pew, the NGO, and is now an effort really taking off in Georgia, with the Georgia Conservancy leading the Georgia implementation team. And also there are similar teams in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. I think you did a podcast on that topic, didn't you?
We did. Courtney Reich joined us for SOS, Save Our Salt Marsh, which we'll link to in the show notes if you missed it. And Signer, like you, Michelle, is a part of the Georgia implementation team for SASME. It's still early in the process, but we're all working to inform people about SASME and how communities can get involved in protecting the beautiful salt marsh we have along the southeast coast. What are some future plans or sites that are also working to protect the salt marsh?
Great question, Corinne. I'm really interested in marsh sustainability. A long time ago, I studied marshes on Sapelo Island for my master's degree. As you know, sea level is rising, and in many places it is rising faster than the marsh can grow to keep up with it. So some marshes are changing into open water. A promising new idea is to use the mud that is dredged up from navigation channels to build up these marshes and restore them. The Army Corps of Engineers is really interested in this idea and has some pilot projects, including one in Georgia. Some military installations are looking at this idea to protect their shorelines, while others, like Kings Bay, are doing a lot of dredging and want their mud to be used in a way that benefits the coastal ecosystem. So that's one new innovative idea that I think could really take off.
Wow, those are some exciting projects. Finding a beneficial use to the local community for what might be considered waste material seems like a great stewardship idea. This could help improve the relationship between a DoD site and the community it's connected to. I know that community buy-in and engagement can be really important around DoD sites. I mean, as a military brat myself, I know many people stationed at these sites are moving to this area for the first time, and they may not have connections to the local community. So connecting the local community, including partners on the coast, to the DoD command and military community can be pretty difficult. What are some things you found when working with DoD sites to be more challenging? And also, how is engagement different with a community living on a DoD site?
You are right, Brittany. Engagement with DoD can be difficult, especially for those that don't have experience with the concept of command structure and don't already have a contact point. Sometimes it's hard to find the correct person on an installation to talk with. Fortunately, I've had some great experiences with the military folks here in Georgia on the coast, and some of the work they're doing in natural resources is absolutely amazing. While some of the soldiers, sailors, and their families are not from this area, I have found we have so much in common, especially a love of the outdoors and wildlife.
Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. We'll be sure to link more information about Michelle's work in our show notes today.
You know what? I guess I always assumed the naval base didn't really have to worry much about flooding.
Why wouldn't they have to worry about flooding? They're right on the water.
Well, Because they've got the best SEAL team.
SEAL team? Like,
No, like SEAL team, like Navy SEALs. But I'm using seal like sealed from water.
No.
Yeah. It works.
Well, I mean, speaking of SEAL team, I heard that due to budget cuts, the Naval SEALs will be now replaced.
Oh, by who?
The Navy Otters.
I don't think that's true.
Well, I know for sure that they plant a lot of trees at the bases, but they're only young trees.
Okay, why do you say that?
What do you mean when I say they're only young trees?
Yeah.
Well, I keep hearing them talk about growing their infant trees.
For more information about any of the topics we covered today, or to submit your question that may be featured in our upcoming episodes, please email us at signer.socials@gmail.com. That's SINERR.socials@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening to Sapelo Nerds, a coastal science podcast brought to you by the Sapelo Island National Estuarine Research Reserve. Please check back for more episodes released each month. And we really need reviews, so, leave us a couple of good ones. Really good ones.
And that's the Sapelo Sound.